What is up, dudes? Welcome to the second recording of this video. I had a technical glitch, which meant that none of the audio in the first video got recorded. So here we are. Welcome back to a solo edition of Friends Talking Movies. I am Captain Gimpy, and today I'm here to talk to you about something very cool. Somebody I think is awesome recommended this to me, and I remember hearing about this documentary probably back in 2009. There were notions of this thing being made. It is a bit confusing on IMDb because it had a release date in 2012, but nobody got to see it outside of film festivals. And recently, like 3 days before my birthday this year, on October 5th, this finally got released on iTunes and Amazon Prime. It's a documentary called CinemAbility, guys. CinemAbility. It's a concatenation of what? Cinema and ability. And this documentary is all about representation in the film and TV industries. And to be honest with you, it's one of the best anythings that I've seen on the subject. I mean, I've read books about this stuff. I've talked to people who are concerned with it. But this is by far the best. So what it starts out with is one central premise that the issue of representation is important. It doesn't dispute that it's important, and if you think it's not, I'd be willing to have an actual discussion if you're open to that. But if you're just gonna ram this, then I think I will move on. But so it starts off with the premise that it is important. So the way Jamie Foxx puts it in the documentary, when you see someone wearing the same jersey as you, you root for that team, right? And for me, that line stuck because, I didn't grow up with very many positive images of disabled people or people of Asian descent. Like, I basically just had Bruce Lee, dudes. That was that was it. I had Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan. And as far as disability went, I mean, for the most part, I tried to pretend I didn't have one, even though if you've seen me, I don't really know how that's possible. um, so with the idea that whenever you see someone wearing the same jersey as you, like when you see someone else who looks like you, who is portrayed in a positive light, dude, that gives you a whole different idea of who you could be. Like when I saw Bruce Lee, like a bunch of other kids, I wanted to learn karate, I wanted to learn kung fu, I wanted to be a ninja. So I learned some stuff, and it was cool, but fighting is not like it is on TV, and it hurts a lot, so don't do it. If you can get away with not doing it, don't. Um, I thought this was really cool because we got to see a bunch of people that you don't often think of. Like Ben Affleck had some stuff to say that I thought was actually useful. Um, Gary Sinise, who played Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump, talked about um, his experience portraying Lieutenant Dan, and he talked about how it meant a lot to him because he had veterans coming up to him and being like, that was such an accurate portrayal of what I went through. Like, Lieutenant Dan goes through it, man, from the loss of his legs to being angry at the world to being sad to finally, like, taking the bull by the horns and just, like, living life. And that was one of the first times I really remember clearly seeing a positive portrayal of somebody who was sort of kind of like me. Because, I was an angry kid, so I kind of identified with the Lieutenant Dan thing. Come get me, God, all that stuff. You know what I mean? One of the things I thought was pretty interesting, and I didn't actually know this until the episode aired. You know the dude who plays the medical examiner on the original, I think it's the original CSI. Wait, no. I forget which, it's one of them. So he's actually a double amputee, right? And so there was this one episode where he like takes off one of his prostheses and like chucks it. And I had just started laughing. Apparently some people got mad at that. Because, I don't know. Maybe they want to be seen as perfect, but I thought it was great. Um, and there's also this dude. I think his name is Danny Woodburn. He's a little person. He's been in a bunch of really, really funny movies. He played Jerry's mini me on Seinfeld in the one episode where um, Jason Alexander's character gets his nuts grabbed by him. I thought he's great, man. He has a really positive attitude on things, and he brought up something I thought was interesting. He said that for him, um, he made the connection between dwarfism and the Oompa Loompas, right? And he was like, "Oh, I recognize that as being dwarfism, like I have." Um, but when it came to the Wizard of Oz, he enjoyed it just like everybody else and didn't even see a connection. And the funny thing is, he didn't realize it until people started referring to him as one of the dudes from the Wizard of Oz, but in a negative context. And that's when he started seeing that this stuff as a kid could be used to hurt you. And so he talked about how, you know, calling a little person a midget is tantamount to using one of the most atrocious of racial slurs that we have at our disposal that I won't repeat. I think that's a very valid point, and I would never argue that point because I see exactly what he's coming from or where he's coming from. One of the cool things about this documentary is that it looks at cinematic history in terms of disability. So you start seeing um, films from the silent era and talking about how the portrayals of people with disabilities were either profoundly innocent and in need of pity or help, or people not to be trusted for their disfigurements. Think of public perception of Quasimodo and the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Um, and also that there's something asexual about people with disabilities, right? So they gave this example of a Charlie Chaplin movie where the Trent character, tries to raise money for a blind woman to have a sight restoring operation. And pre-op, she is very innocent, childlike, and kind of bubbly and just innocent. And then afterwards, she becomes a full person. She becomes flirtatious, sexual, to the standards of the day and all that sort of thing. And I think those stereotypes still persist to this day. In fact, I don't just think it, I've experienced them myself. People tend to think that people in wheelchairs or whatever you got going on, tend to be asexual, saintly sages. And he talked about the whole old sage thing with the Bride of Frankenstein. They had a film historian on there who I thought was really awesome. I need to read whatever he writes so I can educate myself more. RJ Mitty, who you guys might know as Walter Jr. from Breaking Bad, said that he didn't really mention his disability until he got to the casting office to do the audition, or when he went to the audition, because he didn't want to be typecast or denied before he even got in the door. So he would mention it when he was auditioning for a given part. Um, One thing I thought was really interesting also was Jamie Foxx talking about having to portray a younger Ray Charles. And he talked about wearing prostheses over his eyes so that he'd be blind, because the director thought it was really important for him to feel the confusion and the helplessness that comes about with first losing your sight, so he could better understand what Ray Charles went through and how he became clearly the badass that he was as a human being. Um, you also hear from Teal Shearer. If you guys are familiar with the Guild, she was the hot chick Venom in the wheelchair, and she made a web series of her own called My Gimpy Life, which I think does a lot to portray a more nuanced version of what it means to have a disability, because she's just a normal person who's coping with life after an accident. And I, for one, think she's thriving, dude. And or dudes, like I'm only talking to one dude, right? Let's see what else. Cousin Jerry from The Facts of Life. I vaguely remember watching this and thinking, "Wow, people with CP can walk." Um, But she said something that really resonated with me. When I was growing up, kids and parents alike would avoid me. they would automatically like swerve way the fuck out of my way. Like way out of my way, dudes. And she said that prior to doing the Facts of Life, kids would avoid her. After that, they would come up to her and they'd start talking. And she'd get to, get to know them, educate them a little bit if they had questions about CP, which I'm very familiar with answering. And yeah, you know, and I can't remember his name, but there's this dude who did a guest spot on Desperate Housewives. I can't even talk. Um, I'm gonna have to look it up. I'll put it down in the description. But he talked about before his accident, he was fighting against being black and the public perception of, a black actor, what kinds of roles you'd typically be called for and whatnot. And he said he fought all his life so he could do all these mainstream roles. And then the way he put it was when he got into his accident, he was black all over again, and he had to start right from the bottom and work his way back up. And I respect that, man, because it's true. Um, I know for me, there was one time I went on a job interview. This was a double interview process. We had a phone interview and then an in-person interview, and they were looking for a dude who could build, update, and maintain a website for this guy who used to do stage shows on college campuses. So I applied for the job. They were really interested in me because I had a beast resume back then. And they did the phone interview. Everything went great. And then I went to go meet him. And the first thing both the husband and wife said to me is like, "Oh." And I was like, "Yeah?" It was like, "Oh, well, on the phone, you didn't sound like you were in a wheelchair." Like, I don't even know what that sounds like, dudes. But that was their reaction. And so I felt that myself. In fact, I've been denied jobs for that. And I know you can sue, dudes. Don't leave that in the comments. I understand. But I wasn't really that kind of dude back then. Now, if that ever happened to me, you better believe I'd sue. But back then, I wasn't trying to make too many waves. I was fresh out of high school and didn't know what I was doing. And so a lot of that sort of stuff stuck with me. And, one of the key points that gets brought up toward the end of the documentary that I think is really important. William H. Macy put it like this. He was talking about a script that he was working on at the time and was due soon. This was probably like in 2010 or even 2009, given the amount of time it takes to film and edit a doc. But he said, I got a script coming up soon, and I've been involved with UCP for years, and I didn't write a disabled character into my movie. And it's not because I have any prejudices against them or anything like that. Like, it just didn't occur to me. And he said, the problem is, I think that's what we have to do. We have to think about it. We have to intentionally think about it until it becomes so common that it's not a surprise, for example, that Danny Glover, as opposed to a white actor, would be cast as Mel Gibson's partner in the Lethal Weapon series. Because the the director of that film said that, originally it hadn't even occurred to him, even though he thought of himself as fairly progressive and liberal. Unless it's written in the script, people don't think about it, and that's not your fault. That's something that we all have to take up and take responsibility for. And that's why I think this documentary is so powerful. I'm going to leave a couple of links to where you can get it down in the description. I totally recommend watching it wholeheartedly. I have a friend of mine who's going to review this too for you guys, and hopefully we'll get some good dialogue going, and I'll see you guys at the movies.